Dilek Tuna and you're watching A News. Let's take a look at today's top stories. Donald Trump doubles down on bringing Greenland under US control, drawing sharp warnings from European leaders. A commuter train derailed near Barcelona, killing the driver and injuring dozens, raising safety concerns in Spain's rail network. And Syria has announced a ceasefire with Kurdish forces to give them 4 days to agree on integrating into the central state. US President Donald Trump's Air Force One returned to Joint Base Andrews Tuesday evening, about an hour after takeoff for Switzerland. The crew detected a minor electrical issue. The White House says the decision to turn the aircraft around was made out of caution. The president will board a replacement plane and continue his trip to the World Economic Forum in Davos. At Davos for the World Economic Forum, US President Donald Trump is expected to outline plans to expand a new Board of Peace as part of a broader diplomatic agenda with potential global impact. Our correspondent, Obey Shabanda, has more.
In the annual gathering of world leaders in the Swiss Alps, President Trump's presence in Davos, Switzerland, comes at a time when the American president is shaping global geopolitics through a combination of diplomacy, economic power and leverage, and occasionally threats to unleash the full force of American military might. He has established a Board of Peace to oversee the peace process in the Middle East. And according to the White House, this body would, quote, embark on a bold new approach to resolving global conflict. That's according to Trump administration officials. Some in policy circles believe that Trump's Board of Peace could even rival the United Nations Security Council as an international entity dedicated to conflict resolution. President Trump is expected to announce in Davos the expansion of the Board of Peace's mandate to go beyond rebuilding Gaza and to focus on ongoing issues around the world. A senior U.S. official told Axios on Tuesday that President Trump remains focused on the Western Hemisphere as his priority, but that he also recognizes America as serving as the world leader. That's according to a White House source. President Trump's renewed calls for the acquisition of Greenland, a territory that is currently controlled by Denmark, will undoubtedly be front and center in high-level talks that will occur in Davos. The president posted earlier on social media a number of private messages that he had received from European leaders, including the Secretary General of NATO, expressing their desire to reach a resolution with Trump on Greenland. Earlier in the week, President Trump shared a text exchange that he had with the Norwegian Prime Minister, where President Trump stated that he will no longer focus primarily on peace, given what he viewed as a flawed process for awarding the Nobel Peace Prize. President Trump has also threatened the renewed imposition of major tariffs on the European Union if his demands on Greenland are not met. Trump also plans to meet with Ukraine's leader Vladimir Zelensky at Davos, while envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are expected to meet with Russian envoy Kirill Dmitriev to discuss the way forward on the Ukraine-Russia war. President Trump has also reportedly invited Russian President Vladimir Putin to join his Board of Peace. An official launch of the board is expected on Thursday in Davos, and a number of countries, including Morocco, Qatar, Indonesia, Hungary, and Kazakhstan, have already agreed to join. And as the possibility of Greenland becoming an American territory has worried a number of European NATO allies, President Trump posted on Truth Social that if it wasn't for him, that the transatlantic military alliance would, in his words, have been in the ash heaps of history. I'm Ubay Shabander for A News, reporting from California.
Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump has doubled down on his push to bring Greenland under US control, refusing to rule out force as he heads to the World Economic Forum in Davos. European leaders have pushed back sharply, warning against intimidation and threats to sovereignty.
US President Donald Trump says there is no going back on his ambition to take control of Greenland as he prepared to travel to the World Economic Forum in Davos for talks with European leaders. Speaking at the White House before his departure, Trump said negotiations were planned in Switzerland and suggested a deal could still be reached.
Look, they need that agreement very badly with us. They really do. They fought very hard to get it, so I doubt that. But we'll see what happens. We have a lot of meetings scheduled on Greenland. I'm leaving tonight, as you know, for Davos, and we have a lot of meetings scheduled on Greenland. And I think things are going to work out pretty well, actually.
Earlier, Trump refused to rule out the use of force and warned of sweeping tariffs on European goods if allies oppose his plan, raising fears of a renewed transatlantic trade war and strains within NATO. In Davos, European leaders moved quickly to respond. President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, said the European Union stands in full solidarity with Greenland. French President Emmanuel Macron warned against intimidation and rejected what he called the law of the strongest.
We do believe that we need more growth, we need more stability in this world. But we do prefer respect to bullies, we do prefer science to plotism, and we do prefer rule of law to brutality.
European Union leaders have said that US tariffs linked to Greenland could trigger retaliation, including wide-ranging trade measures. Meanwhile, Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen once again reiterated that she would not yield to Trump's demands and abandon Greenland.
Because this is about much more than ourselves. We can negotiate about everything: political, security, investments and economics. But we cannot negotiate about our fundamental values: sovereignty, the identity of our countries and our borders, our democracy.
Both the Greenlandic and Danish governments have repeatedly said the Arctic territory is not for sale and that its future can only be decided by its people.
The main political groups in the European Parliament have said they will delay ratifying the EU-US trade deal due to President Donald Trump's tariff threats over Greenland. Trump announced that from the 1st of February, Washington will impose 10% tax on goods from Denmark, Norway, Sweden, France, Germany, the UK, the Netherlands and Finland. It's set to rise to 25% from the 1st of June. He said the measures will remain in place until a deal is reached for us to acquire Greenland and self-governing territory within the Kingdom of Denmark. Envoys for US President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin entered the USA House at the World Economic Forum in Davos on Tuesday. Reporters saw Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner enter the venue. A media source said Russian envoy Kirill Dmitriev was also inside. Dmitriev is expected to meet members of the US delegation on the sidelines of the forum. The discussions come as diplomatic contacts continue over the war in Ukraine. Ukraine's chief negotiator, Rustem Umerov, said talks with US officials on a possible settlement would continue during the Davos meetings. President Trump is due to attend the forum in person on Wednesday, accompanied by a US delegation. Over to Ukraine now, where a Russian airstrike has left more than 1 million people in Kyiv without power, hitting key substations linked to Ukraine's nuclear plants. Kyiv says the attack risks nuclear safety and is being used as a tool of pressure. The strikes come amid renewed diplomatic efforts for peace, adding fresh tension to the conflict.
Ukrainians are having to continue to deal with freezing temperatures after a Russian airstrike on Tuesday left more than 1 million people in Kyiv without power. The attack also damaged substations that carry electricity from Ukraine's nuclear plants. Kyiv accused Moscow of using the risk of nuclear disaster as a tool of coercion. Ukrainian officials say Moscow used 330 drones and nearly 30 missiles, killing 4 people. 3 were in Zaporizhzhia and 1 in the Kyiv region. Other parts of eastern, southern and northern Ukraine were also hit. This was the second major strike on Ukraine's capital this month. Emergency crews are working around the clock to restore power and heating as temperatures drop to minus 13 degrees Celsius. President Volodymyr Zelensky said more than 4,000 buildings had no heating. Deputy Prime Minister Oleksiy Kuleba said 68 repair teams were working in the capital. More than 1,400 emergency heating centres have been opened for residents to warm up and charge phones. The International Atomic Energy Agency said several key substations were damaged. Power lines to other nuclear plants were also affected. Ukraine gets more than half of its electricity from nuclear energy. The agency added that the Chernobyl plant briefly lost all external power but was later reconnected. In the northern Chernihiv region, authorities said 87% of residents were left without electricity. Russia said it struck military, energy and transport targets. At the World Economic Forum in Davos this week, US and Russian envoys called talks on a possible peace deal positive and constructive. Zelensky urged Washington to increase pressure on Moscow, saying current measures were not enough. He said he would go to Davos if the US agreed to sign security guarantees and a post-war recovery plan. Ukrainian officials say in total, Russia has destroyed about 8.5 gigawatts of Ukraine's power capacity since late October.
Spain's rail network is under renewed scrutiny after another deadly derailment near Barcelona. A commuter train left the tracks following heavy rain on Tuesday, killing the driver and injuring dozens. Just days after a major high-speed crash in the south of the country. Emergency crews were deployed overnight as investigators assess safety concerns on Spain's busy suburban rail lines.
A commuter train derailed near Barcelona after a containment wall collapsed onto the tracks during heavy rainfall, killing the driver and leaving dozens injured. Claudi Gallardo, inspector of Catalonia Fire Department, said emergency crews found multiple injured passengers at the scene. He confirmed the driver was killed and 4 people were seriously hurt. He added that all passengers were safely removed from the train as rescue operations continued. The derailment occurred in the early hours near the town of Gelida, about 35 kilometres from Barcelona. Emergency services deployed around 20 ambulances and dozens of firefighters as police secured the area. Authorities said 37 people were injured in total. The suburban line has long faced criticism over underinvestment and repeated safety incidents as investigators now examine whether weather conditions and structural failures contributed to the crash. The incident comes just 2 days after Spain's deadliest rail disaster in more than a decade, when a high-speed train crash in southern Córdoba province killed 42 people. Rail officials also reported a separate disruption on the Barcelona commuter network later the same day after a train axle came off the track near Girona.
A major shake-up in Dutch politics as 7 MPs leave Geert Wilders' far-right PVV party to form a new group under Geert Marquesur. The split weakens Wilders opens the way for more cooperation in coalition talks and could shift the balance of power in The Hague. Anita Sharma has more.
Welcome to This Day in Europe and a major shakeup in Dutch politics. 7 members of the far-right Party for Freedom, or PVV, led by Geert Wilders, quit the party's 26-member parliamentary faction to form a new group, which will be led by long-serving MP Geert Marquesur. It's a serious internal blow to Wilders' leadership since the PVV was founded in 2006. He says the defection spells a loss of his friendship with Marquesur, but Wilders insists his party will survive this crisis. Still, this split exposes deep fractures over strategy and direction. The lawmakers wanted to assess the PVV's, or rather Wilders' disappointing performance in the last election, which Wilders was opposed to, and they opposed Wilders' hardline leadership style, where he was the only actual party member and called most of the shots himself. They seek a broader profile, as the PVV focused mostly on anti-immigration and Eurosceptic policies. They also want more cooperation with other parties amid coalition talks to form a new government. While Wilders refused to have any talks with the three parties brokering a new minority coalition, Marcus Sauer says he can't imagine the attitude of not wanting to be at the table. The split significantly shrinks the PVV and its influence in the 150-seat Tweede Kamer, or House of Representatives. It paves the way for the Green Left, or Labour Party, to emerge as the largest opposition force. This fallout goes well beyond party politics, with the PVV weakened and a breakaway group signaling a more cooperative approach. The balance of power in The Hague is shifting at a critical moment in government formation. Whether this marks the start of a broader recalibration of the Dutch far right or merely a temporary setback for Geert Wilders, it will shape not only the next coalition, but also the Netherlands' future course on immigration and its role inside the European Union. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
European farmers are stepping up pressure on European Union leaders over the Mercosur trade deal. With key parliamentary votes approaching, protesters warn the agreement could threaten farming standards and livelihoods across Europe.
Farmers staged protests outside the European Parliament in Strasbourg on Tuesday, opposing the EU-Mercosur trade agreement as lawmakers prepare to vote on its legal future. Many of the demonstrators arrived with tractors, holding banners accusing the deal of unfair competition and lower agricultural standards. Police were deployed around the Parliament building.
We have lost a battle, but not the war. Today, the fight is to take this case to the Court of Justice. We hope members of the European Parliament will agree that the protocol used by Ursula von der Leyen is not the right one.
The head of France's main farmers' union urged EU lawmakers to seek a legal review of the Mercosur deal.
We are calling on all EU lawmakers to take up the issue, including perhaps some who might actually be in favour of Mercosur, because asking whether this agreement is or is not compliant with European law is a valid question, especially concerning the famous rebalancing clause.
The European Parliament will vote on Wednesday on whether to refer the agreement to the EU Court of Justice and suspend ratification. The deal, signed last weekend in Paraguay, could potentially become the EU's largest trade agreement after 25 years of negotiations. Lawmakers are also expected to vote on Thursday on a motion of censure against the European Commission regarding the Mercosur deal, the fourth such challenge to Ursula von der Leyen's administration. Farmers say protests will continue across France in the coming days as pressure grows on European leaders over the controversial agreement.
Syria has announced a ceasefire with Kurdish forces to give them 4 days to agree on integrating into the central state. Damascus says it's aimed at easing tensions and supporting talks on integrating Kurdish fighters, despite recent clashes. It marks another major shift since President Ahmed al-Shara came to power.
The Syrian government and the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces have agreed to a 4-day ceasefire. It's after swift army advances across the northeast. The temporary pause began on Tuesday evening following the capture of large areas previously held by the SDF. Damascus says the move is intended to support the integration of Kurdish forces into the Syrian state and has asked the SDF to put forward a candidate for Assistant Defense Minister. The SDF says it has accepted the ceasefire and will not act unless attacked, though it reports fresh shelling by government-aligned groups near Hasaka. The SDF also agreed to withdraw from Raqqa and Deir al-Zor, home to Syria's main oil fields, marking the biggest shift in control since President Ahmed al-Shara came to power after Bashar al-Assad's fall in 2024. US President Donald Trump said Washington is seeking to protect the Kurds when questioned about Kurdish rights in Syria.
Well, I like the Kurds, but just so you understand, the Kurds were paid tremendous amounts of money, were given oil and other things, so they were doing it for themselves, more so than they were doing it for us. But we got along with the Kurds, and we are trying to protect the Kurds. That's correct.
While the deal is a setback for Kurdish autonomy, the United States says its focus has changed. Envoy Tom Barrack says Washington now views Damascus as its main partner against ISIL, as al-Sharaa pushes to reunify a country still deeply divided by years of war.
Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump said he had a very good call with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan on Tuesday. The Turkish presidency said they discussed Syria and Gaza. They also talked about fighting Islamic State and the situation of IS prisoners in Syrian jails. It's after Syria's government has taken control of parts of the northeast and ordered the SDF to join the central state. The US said its partnership with the SDF has changed under the new Syrian government. However, Turkey sees the SDF as linked to the outlawed PKK and wants it to disarm. Erdogan said a stable Syria would boost regional stability. The leaders also discussed Gaza. Erdogan said Turkey would continue working with Washington for peace and thanked Trump for the Board of Peace invitation. Trump said the call was very important but gave no further detail.
Almost immediately.
And the US military says it seized a Venezuela-linked oil tanker in the Caribbean, the seventh such interception in recent weeks as Washington steps up efforts to curb Caracas crude exports. The US military says it took control of the motor vessel Saguita without any violence. Officials say the tanker was breaking US rules on Venezuelan oil shipments and that the seizure is part of a wider effort to make sure Venezuelan crude is only moved through approved channels. Venezuela's interim president Delcy Rodriguez says the country received $300 million from oil sales. She said this is the first proceeds from the US deal to supply 50 million barrels of Venezuelan oil. She says the funds will be used to pay workers' wages and protect them from inflation and currency changes. Caracas says it split the revenue held in a Qatar account among 4 banks, which will sell dollars to companies needing foreign currency to buy supplies. President Donald Trump says some of the barrels of oil were being sold on the open market.
In terms of military, in terms of...
Now let's take a look at the major stories from the region. Speaking at an international forum in Davos during the panel Defining Eurasia's Economic Identity, Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev addressed the growing strain on the global economic order. He argued that traditional multilateral institutions are no longer delivering stability and that countries must prioritize sovereignty and national interests to navigate global shocks.
But with respect to the issues of multilateralism, unilateralism, protectionism, we see that everything is crumbling. World Trade Organization is crumbling. By the way, Azerbaijan did not join WTO, though we've been invited for 30 years, just because we want to have economic sovereignty. We want to have political sovereignty, at the same time having good relations with numerous interlocutors. Look, we have strategic partnership documents signed with 10 members of European Union, comprehensive strategic partnership agreement signed with China, strategic partnership charter is being discussed with the United States, and all this is possible. It does not contradict one another when you have a clear vision for your country, for your future, when you have power, when you have consolidated society, and when you do what is right, regardless who says what and who will publish some articles about you and what you are doing.
Azerbaijan's role as a regional anchor and investment destination drew rare, direct praise from international media and business leaders at Davos on Tuesday. In a public exchange with President Ilham Aliyev, speakers highlighted the country's geopolitical balancing act, its energy strategy, and its growing relevance for Europe and beyond.
As global leaders gathered in Davos for the World Economic Forum this week, Azerbaijan emerged as an unexpected focal point, cited as a case study in resilience, strategic positioning and long-term stability. At the Azerbaijan executive breakfast, President Ilham Aliyev was joined by international media and business leaders, including Pedro Vargas, chairman of Euronews. Vargas described Azerbaijan as a rare example of balance between geopolitics, economic reform and social cohesion.
For sure, when your neighbors are Russia, when your neighbors are Iran, when your neighbors are countries who have historically had territorial ambitions, it's not easy to survive. And you need a combination of strength and diplomacy, and that is what I think you have achieved. Azerbaijan is now a country who is ready to receive foreign investment, who is open to that foreign investment.
So far,
President Aliyev explained how Azerbaijan has handled sustained international scrutiny, particularly over its role as an energy producer, and why he believes hosting major global events was a necessary, if costly, decision.
Where we've been accused that we are oil-producing country, and how can oil-producing country host the COP? Though there have been countries before and after Azerbaijan, which produce much more oil than Azerbaijan. But the question was about us, and I said that it's not our fault to have oil. We should not be blamed for that. We must be judged by how we manage the oil wells, how it's fairly distributed in the society. So this was one of the lessons, because frankly speaking, during this 1 year of preparation for COP, I regretted many times that we entered this adventure.
Aliyev said Azerbaijan's international positioning is no longer limited to diplomacy or energy, arguing that global sports and entertainment have become another way the country signals openness, visibility and integration.
Last year, it was first time in Baku, it was a UFC tournament with the participation of leading sportsmen. And that also was on the, how to say, all the main TV channels. So I hope UFC also will be a traditional. Not many countries host UFC, primarily United States. So putting Azerbaijan on the map also demonstrates a capability of our country. Because when you...
Turning to Europe, Aliyev acknowledged strong demand for Azerbaijani gas, but noted a disconnect between consumption and investment, contrasting it with deepening cooperation with the United States.
Last year, we exported more than 25 billion cubic meters of natural gas, and almost 13 billion was exported to Europe. And this number will grow. And it was done based on the request from European Commission. After Russian-Ukrainian war started, European Commission President came to Baku, and we signed a document on strategic partnership in the energy sector. And we agreed that we will double our gas supply to Europe from the existing, at that time, almost 8 to 16 BCM. So in some 3 years plus, we already almost reached 13.
Aliyev said Azerbaijan is now positioning itself for the next phase, spanning energy, technology, data infrastructure and strategic connectivity, while urging European partners not to miss the opportunity.
A number of Iranian parliamentarians have urged the foreign minister to reduce the level of Tehran's diplomatic relations with France, Germany and the UK, as they've put it, siding with the United States in supporting the protests in Iran. Our correspondent Turaj Shiraliliu has more on that in Tehran.
Some 27 members of Iranian parliament, in an official note to Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, have demanded him to lower Iran's diplomatic ties with France, Germany and United Kingdom. According to Parliament News Agency, the MPs said that officials in Berlin, London and Paris have joined US government in backing the violent protests in the last 3 weeks. Ironically, the European Troika were behind reinstallment of UN sanctions against Iran's nuclear program last year, both at the International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna and at the Security Council in New York. Araghchi is not obligated to follow the parliamentarian's note before it is passed as a legislation, while his ministry is under increasing pressure overseas in the wake of crackdown of the protests. His invitations to take part at the ongoing World Economic Forum annual meeting in Switzerland, as well as the annual Munich Security Conference in mid-February in Germany, were cancelled. According to Parliament Speaker Mohammad Baqir Ghalibaf, thousands of people were killed during the unrests, saying that the high number was due to armed attacks by terrorist elements against protesters, pedestrians, and law enforcement forces. In the last 2 weeks, international internet traffic has been blocked to zero for security reasons in Iran. But an MP and a presidential advisor have said that it may resume in coming days based on an order by President Masoud Pezeshkian. Turad Shiralilu, Tehran, A News.
That's the world news for this hour. Stay tuned to A News for more updates.